cheerful village fete turns chilling when Agatha Raisin's bid for best-groomed pet unearths something far darker than a ribbon. And once again, curiosity proves a dangerous habit. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Carsely woke to sunshine that looked far more optimistic than it had any right to be. After weeks of rain, the Dembley Gate front lawn, lent grandly to the Garden Society for the day, shone with wet grass and false cheer, bunting drooping between the trees like half-hearted smiles. The annual Garden Society pet show was underway, and Agatha Raisin, her vanity bruised but not defeated, was determined to make a comeback. "You'll win, Hodge," she announced, brandishing a hairbrush at her cat, who was crouched on the kitchen table with the long-suffering expression of a prisoner awaiting transport. "You're sleek, intelligent, and you don't drool like a Labrador. They can't ignore that." Hodge, unimpressed, flicked his tail and turned to inspect the window. Outside, Doris Simpson's terrier was being stuffed into a knitted jumper. Agatha muttered, "Ridiculous," and reached for her compact mirror. Her reflection was critical. Perhaps the turquoise jacket was too bright for a country event, but she wasn't about to blend in with tweedy matrons. The Red Lion's landlord was judging best-groomed pet, which suited Agatha fine. He'd never forgiven her for outbidding him at the charity auction, and she trusted in male pride to make him fair. By mid-morning, the green was alive with barking gossip and the faint smell of disinfectant. Mrs. Bloxby, looking serenely unruffled as ever, was overseeing the tea stall. Bill Wong lingered near the police charity tent, plainly wishing he were elsewhere. "Morning, Bill," Agatha called brightly. "Come to admire excellence?" "If that's what we're calling it," he said mildly, hands in pockets. Agatha ignored the remark, sweeping towards the competition ring. Sir Cedric Blathorne was already there, tall, silver-haired, wearing a blazer that screamed old money and self-importance. His poodle, Daphne, was clipped to absurd precision and wore a diamante collar. "Ah, Mrs. Raisin," Sir Cedric said, his tone oozing disdain. "I see you've entered your feline?" "Cat," said Agatha sharply. "Perfectly permissible. The rules say any domesticated pet." "How enterprising. London types do love bending rules. I'm sure your little Moggy will perform admirably." Agatha smiled thinly. She imagined tipping a teapot over his smug head. The contest began. A parade of creatures strutted past. Yapping dogs, sulky cats, even a pet ferret. Agatha kept Hodge contained in his wicker basket, lifting the lid for inspection only when the judge approached. Hodge met the scrutiny with cool indifference. "Fine coat," murmured the judge, "though a bit temperamental, perhaps." "Temperamental?" Agatha snapped. "He's discerning." Her hopes rose when the judge frowned at Daphne's over-scented curls. Then Sir Cedric leaned over and drawled loudly, "I dare say she's less likely to shed on the furniture than some entrants." A titter ran through the crowd. Agatha's smile stiffened. The moment was broken by a sudden commotion. Daphne, ignoring decorum, had begun digging furiously near the bunting post, flinging turf into the air. Her jewelled collar glittered as she yapped, paws tearing at the earth. "Daphne, stop that!" cried Sir Cedric, but the dog was unstoppable. She barked wildly, and then the crowd's laughter turned to gasps. Something pale and rigid protruded from the churned soil, a bone, long and unmistakably human. The judge recoiled. Mrs. Bloxby dropped her teacup. Agatha blinked, her indignation melting into fascination. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered, peering closer. "That's no lamb shank." Within minutes, the green was swarming with activity. Someone had phoned the police. The tape went up, and the pet show was abruptly cancelled. Bill Wong's calm efficiency took over as villagers buzzed like flies around honey. "Back up, everyone," he ordered. "It's evidence until proven otherwise." "Evidence of what?" demanded Agatha. "Surely not. Too soon to tell." Sir Cedric puffed himself up. "My garden show is being turned into a circus. I'll be speaking to the council." "Council?" Agatha snapped. "Someone's been buried under your dog's nose and you're worried about paperwork." He glared at her. "Mrs. Raisin, you'd do well to confine yourself to cats and cosmetics." That stung. "I'll have you know," she began, but Bill's look silenced her. By afternoon, Carsely had gone from quaint to notorious. The Red Lion was packed. Everyone claimed to have seen the skull, though none had. Theories multiplied. One woman swore it was Roman. Another whispered about a love triangle. Agatha listened, cigarette in hand, both irritated and exhilarated. "They're all idiots," she told Mrs. Bloxby later. "No one buries a Roman by the pet tent. I smell scandal, not history." Mrs. Bloxby smiled gently. "Do try not to go digging yourself, Agatha." "Me? Certainly not," Agatha said, already planning to call Bill the next morning. At dusk she stood at her cottage gate watching the police lights fade from the green. Hodge yowled from his basket, demanding release. "Oh, hush," she muttered. "You're lucky. You only lost a ribbon. I lost my dignity and my chance at best-groomed pet." She bent to stroke his fur, then looked back toward the taped-off patch of earth. Somewhere beneath that neat lawn, someone's secret had been lying quietly, until a silly poodle decided to tell on them. Agatha lit a cigarette, the match flaring briefly against the darkening sky. "Trust a dog," she murmured, exhaling. "They always dig up the truth sooner or later." By the next morning, Carsely had settled into a deceptive calm, soft drizzle on honeystone roofs, the faint hum of milk vans, and somewhere the clink of teacups, pretending the world hadn't changed overnight. It had, of course. By 9 o'clock, the village was buzzing like a beehive knocked with a stick. Agatha Raisin, still in her dressing gown and hair like a disgruntled dandelion, stood by the window with her first cigarette of the day. Hodge crouched on the armchair, tail flicking as if impatient with human idiocy. Across the lane, Doris Simpson was already gossiping to the postman, gesturing dramatically toward the Dembley Gate lawn, now ringed with police tape. "A poacher, I bet," Doris's voice carried faintly through the open sash window. "Buried him right under our noses," Agatha muttered. "Typical. The woman wouldn't know a poacher if he knocked on her door and offered her trout." Her phone rang, shrill, insistent, as if gossip itself had learned to dial. She snatched it up. "Mrs. Raisin, it's Gladys from the WI. We're cancelling the cake rota until the investigation's sorted. Terrible business, isn't it? They say it was a jilted lover murdered by a spy." "A spy?" Agatha repeated flatly. "German, apparently, from the war." "Good heavens, Gladys, that would make the poor man over 80. "Well," Gladys said darkly, "evil never retires." Agatha hung up and exhaled through her nose. The village was already inventing villains faster than the police could rule them out. She dialed Bill Wong's number, hoping for a dose of reason. "Morning, Bill. What's the news?" "Morning, Agatha. Can't discuss the case." "Oh, come on. I found the bone. Well, indirectly, and I'm a taxpayer. That gives me rights." "It gives you curiosity, not clearance," he said. "You're impossible." "Fine. I'll find out myself. I've got contacts in London, you know." "Contacts?" His tone suggested disbelief. Agatha bristled. "Yes, real ones. Not just Doris Simpson and her dog." She slammed the phone down and immediately regretted it. "Well done, Raisin," she muttered. "Alienate the only policeman who doesn't think you're entirely mad." Still, the spark of defiance cheered her. She poured herself a small gin, for medicinal clarity, and reached for her Rolodex. Roy Silver would be perfect, loud, nosy, and allergic to boredom. She rang his office. "Darling," came Roy's bright voice, "I was just thinking of you, honestly." "You never think of anyone unless they're on telly," she said. "Listen, we've got a situation here. A body's turned up in Carsely. Front page stuff. You should come down." "A body? In your little midsummer hamlet?" Roy sounded thrilled. "Do they even have murders there, or is it all jam theft and moral decline?" "Just get on a train," Agatha snapped. "I'll pick you up from Moreton Station." "Ooh, will there be lunch?" "If you bring something edible." Roy arrived that afternoon, trailing designer luggage and cologne strong enough to fell a horse. The Red Lion erupted with excitement at the sight of him, a genuine Londoner in a silk scarf, treating the locals like rare wildlife. "Carsely's secret corpse," he declared to anyone who'd listen. "We'll sell the story to the Daily Mail. I'll handle the publicity." Agatha groaned. "Roy, for once in your life, shut up and listen. We need information, not headlines." "Nonsense. You can't get truth without exposure." Doris Simpson, polishing glasses behind the bar, leaned in. "I reckon it's that old poacher what vanished in 79. I said to Bert then, he's either run off or buried nearby, and look who's right again." "A poacher?" Roy repeated. "Oh, love, that's so rural." Agatha rolled her eyes. "You'd prefer a celebrity corpse, I suppose." Wouldn't everyone? Laughter rippled through the bar. Mrs. Blocksby appeared quietly at Agatha's elbow, carrying her usual air of calm amid lunacy. "Hello, Agatha. I see you've brought reinforcements." "If by reinforcements you mean chaos in human form, yes," Mrs. Blocksby smiled serenely. "I just came to remind you that the truth has a way of surfacing on its own, without interference." "Meaning?" "Meaning perhaps let the police handle it, dear." Agatha bristled again. "They'll file it under unsolved and inconvenient. I intend to help." "Just take care you don't help too much," Mrs. Blocksby said, and glided off to fetch tea, leaving behind a faint scent of lavender and moral superiority. By early evening, the Red Lion was overflowing with theories. A retired colonel swore he'd seen lights near the Green years ago. A teenager claimed her grandmother had known a woman who disappeared around then. Agatha's notebook filled rapidly with nonsense disguised as clues. When the pub quietened, Roy leaned across the table. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "Enjoying is the wrong word," said Agatha. "I'm engaged. There's something personal about it. Sir Cedric's poodle unearths bones on the very day he mocks me. You can call it intuition, but I smell poetic justice." "You smell gin," Roy murmured. Agatha ignored him and ordered another. Later at home, Hodge mewed imperiously for supper, while Agatha sat by the radio, half listening to the evening news. The announcer's dry tones drifted through static. "Police in the Cotswolds have confirmed that bones discovered yesterday in the village of Carsely are human. Preliminary analysis suggests they belong to a woman buried approximately 20 years ago." Agatha's heart quickened. She poured herself another gin, fingers tapping the glass. A woman, 20 years. Not ancient, not Roman. The villager's pet theories evaporated. She stared out at the dark lane. The drizzle had thickened into rain, a steady tapping like a clock counting down. Sir Cedric's words echoed in her mind, burying one's mistakes. Could it have been a slip of the tongue, or the kind of truth that hides behind arrogance? She replayed his expression, the smug certainty, the irritation when Daphne started digging. Hodge leapt onto the armrest, eyes half closed. Agatha scratched his chin absently. "Don't look at me like that. Someone's got to ask questions." The phone rang again. Roy, predictably. "Darling, I found a headline already. From garden fate to grave. How about—" "Roy, go to bed," she interrupted. "You'll need rest. We're going visiting tomorrow." "Visiting who?" "Sir Cedric Blathorne," said Agatha. A pause. "Oh dear. Should I wear black?" "You'll wear something that doesn't blind the countryside. I'll ring Charles for his car." She hung up before he could protest. The decision settled like a pleasant weight in her chest. Reckless, perhaps, but necessary. Agatha looked again at the rain-soaked street, then down at Hodge, who had turned his back in feline disapproval. She smiled faintly. "All right, you disloyal lump. I promise to feed you before I go meddling in murder." She stubbed out her cigarette and rose, her reflection in the window faint but defiant. Outside, the rain blurred the outlines of Carsely's cottages, making them look half-dreamed, half-accused. Tomorrow she would drive up to Dembley Gate and see what sort of man buried the truth under his own roses. The next day's drizzle found Agatha on her doorstep, trench-coated and indignant, exactly as she'd promised, waiting for Charles Fraith's infuriatingly open-top convertible. "You didn't say it was open-top," she complained. "It's only mist, darling," said Charles, lowering himself behind the wheel with lazy grace. "It'll do your complexion good." "If I wanted exfoliation, I'd go to a salon," Agatha muttered, climbing in and clutching her headscarf like a flag of surrender. Hodge, left watching from the window, gave her a look of profound scepticism. The road to Dembley Gate wound through fields glazed with damp. Agatha sat stiffly, rehearsing questions in her head. She told Charles they were calling socially to smooth over the Garden Society debacle, but both knew it was nonsense. She was going to sniff out a scandal, and Charles was coming for the entertainment. "You do realise Sir Cedric hates uninvited guests," Charles remarked. "Perfect. The guilty always do." He smiled sideways. "And what exactly is he guilty of?" "I'll let you know once I find it." Dembley Gate appeared through the drizzle like a sulky ghost. Grey stone, ivy throttling the walls, gravel drive as bare as a monk's head. The house had that weary grandeur of English country homes where the heating bills had long since won. Sir Cedric Blathorne himself opened the door, tall, silver-haired, and about as warm as a tax demand. Mrs. Raisin, Lord Fraith, I can't imagine what brings you here. Purely a courtesy visit, said Agatha, oozing false sweetness. After the incident at the Garden Society show, I thought it best to assure you no one blames you personally. How considerate, he said coldly. Behind him appeared his wife, Clarissa, slim, elegant, and visibly nervous, her smile fluttering like paper in wind. Do come in out of the rain, she murmured. The hall smelled of beeswax and disapproval. Agatha took in the portraits of long-nosed ancestors, all looking as if they'd invented snobbery. We were so distressed, Agatha began, by that dreadful business with Daphne. Dogs are such sensitive creatures, aren't they? They dig where they shouldn't. Indeed, Sir Cedric said. Most creatures do. Charles coughed to hide a laugh. Clarissa offered tea in porcelain cups, so thin Agatha was afraid to breathe near them. It was just such a shock, Clarissa said quickly. Daphne never digs in that part of the garden. Clarissa, her husband interrupted sharply. Don't babble. Agatha's eyes narrowed. Wrong part of the garden, you said? Clarissa flushed. Oh, I just meant, well, she usually prefers the lawn nearer the greenhouse. You know how dogs are. Of course, said Agatha smoothly, filing that away. Charles, sensing tension, leaned forward. Splendid roses outside, Cedric. Must be a devil to keep them alive with all this rain. Our gardener manages, said Sir Cedric curtly. Ah, yes, Agatha said, glancing out of the window. A figure in a cap was trimming hedges with the mechanical cheer of a man under surveillance. He looks familiar. Didn't he once work at your chambers in London? You have an extraordinary memory for irrelevancies, Mrs. Raisin. Occupational hazard, she said. I used to run a PR firm. Remembering people is how one survives. Sir Cedric's expression suggested he would have preferred her not to survive. After another 10 minutes of brittle conversation, Charles rose. Could we perhaps see those roses more closely? Agatha is a keen horticulturalist. Oh, yes, Agatha said quickly. I'm particularly interested in soil composition. It's raining, Sir Cedric said. We're waterproof, Agatha replied, and swept toward the door before he could object. Outside, drizzle thickened to proper rain. The garden stretched in stately disrepair, cracked statuary, overgrown hedges and rose beds too carefully weeded. Agatha bent over one patch and saw faint indentations, as if someone had recently tamped down earth. Charles lounged nearby. You're going to ruin your shoes. Shut up, Charles. She knelt, poking delicately with a stick. Look at this soil. Newer than the rest. You can smell it. I can smell trouble. A creak drew her eye to the greenhouse. Its glass panes were fogged, shapes shifting faintly within. Without asking permission, something she considered optional, Agatha strode inside. The air was heavy with damp earth and dying geraniums. A shelf sagged under pots, most empty, one cracked and half filled with soil. Something glinted inside. She reached for it, heart thudding. It was a brooch, old-fashioned, smeared with earth, its clasp bent. She rubbed it clean against her sleeve and squinted. Tiny engraved letters shone faintly. E.R. Charles, she hissed. Look at this. He wandered in, unimpressed. E.R.? The Queen's lost her jewellery in Dembley. Don't be daft. These are initials. Someone buried here. You do realise you're technically stealing evidence. I'm borrowing it for observation, she said. A sharp voice startled them. What the devil are you doing? Sir Cedric loomed in the doorway, raincoat dark with water, eyes like flint. Clarissa hovered behind him, pale as milk. Admiring your greenhouse, Agatha said, straightening. Lovely structure. Could do with more ventilation. Get out, he said quietly, and stay out. I don't recall inviting you to rummage through my property. Charles raised both hands in mock surrender. Now, Cedric. No need for dramatics. Dramatics? You break into my greenhouse and call me dramatic? Agatha tucked the brooch into her pocket, the movement swift and invisible. No harm done. We'll be on our way. Thank you for the tea. Most educational. Sir Cedric stepped closer, his voice low and icy. Mrs. Raisin, a word of advice. Keep your claws out of other people's dirt. It has a way of swallowing the curious. Lovely image, Agatha said sweetly. Almost poetic. Come along, Charles. They left under the weight of his glare. As the car bumped down the drive, Agatha's pulse began to steady, replaced by the delicious thrill of discovery. Charles gave her a sidelong look. "You nicked something, didn't you?" "Don't be ridiculous," she said primly, then added, "Well, perhaps, only temporarily." "You're impossible." "I'm effective." She held up the brooch for a moment, catching the weak sunlight. "E.R. Could be anyone, but I'll wager it's not Elizabeth Regina." Charles laughed softly. "You're loving this far too much." "Of course I am. It's better than bridge club." By the time they reached Carsely, the drizzle had stopped and the sky blushed faintly pink, as if pretending innocence. Agatha let herself into her cottage, hung up her coat, and fed Hodge, who complained as if she'd been gone a week. "All right, you greedy brute," she said, dropping into her chair. She turned the brooch over in her fingers, noting the bent clasp, the crusted soil. 20 years in the ground, perhaps more. Hodge leapt into her lap, purring like a small engine. Agatha smiled faintly. "Don't worry, I'll dig deeper tomorrow, and I don't mean your litter tray." She lit a cigarette, smoke curling like thought. Outside, Carsely settled into evening, unaware that one of its own was already unearthing what should have stayed buried. "Keep my claws out of the dirt," she murmured. "Not likely." Carsely looked deceptively innocent. The following day, washed clean by overnight rain. The cottages gleamed, the hedges dripped, and somewhere a milk float hummed like a lullaby. Agatha Raisin, however, was already in full battle dress, hair sprayed, lipstick sharp, and the precious brooch polished to a suspicious sparkle. She'd barely swallowed her first mouthful of coffee when Bill Wong knocked. He entered, shaking rain off his jacket, and Hodge immediately inspected him with the solemnity of a customs officer. "Morning, Bill. Tea or coffee?" "Tea, please, strong." Agatha produced it with theatrical efficiency, and then, unable to restrain herself, dropped the brooch onto the table between them. Bill blinked. "Good grief, what's this?" "A clue," Agatha said, enjoying the moment. "Found it yesterday at Dembley Gate, near the greenhouse. Sir Cedric nearly burst a blood vessel." Bill set his cup down so fast it sloshed. "You went to Dembley Gate? Agatha, for heaven's sake, that's trespassing." "Investigating," she corrected primly. "And it paid off. Look at the initials, E.R. Recognize them?" Bill's eyes widened. "Eleanor Redmayne." "Who?" "A governess. Disappeared from Mercester 20 years ago. My father worked the case. She was accused of stealing jewellery from her employers and vanished before trial. They thought she'd fled abroad." Agatha's pulse quickened. "And her employer was?" Bill hesitated. "Not sure. I'd have to look at the old files. But you will not—" "Go digging," Agatha finished airily. "I promise. Now, do you suppose she ever knew the Blaythorns?" "Don't start, Agatha. We don't even know the brooch is hers. It could belong to anyone." "Oh yes, because Dembley Gate is riddled with women named E.R." He sighed. "I mean it. Stay out of it. I don't want you getting mixed up in something nasty again." "You're sweet when you worry," she said, lighting a cigarette. "But if I'd stayed out of things, half of Carsely would still be at large." "Agatha, Bill," she interrupted, "go be official somewhere else. I have plans." He left muttering, and Hodge gave a disapproving meow. Agatha turned to him. "Don't start. He'll thank me when I crack it before his superiors." The phone rang. Roy Silver's voice exploded down the line. "Darling, I've just had a thought. What if it's buried treasure? Or better, a secret affair gone wrong? Lady Blaythorn's illicit lover found in the flower beds." "Roy, stop vibrating. There's no affair." "Yet," he said cheerfully. "But think of the press. I could pitch it as the aristocrat skeletons. Front page potential. This isn't Hello magazine, it's murder." "So much better." She hung up before he could elaborate. Roy was a useful friend, if one enjoyed migraines. To clear her head, she walked to the vicarage. The rain had lifted, leaving the air soft and green. Mrs. Bloxby opened the door with her usual calm smile, which always made Agatha feel vaguely grubby. "Tea, Mrs. Raisin?" "Please, and none of that herbal nonsense." They sat by the window overlooking the damp vicarage garden. Agatha relayed her discovery with relish, downplaying the trespassing but emphasizing the police interest. Mrs. Bloxby stirred her tea slowly. "You do realize Clarissa Blaythorn once employed a governess, years ago, before she married Sir Cedric?" Agatha froze. "What was her name?" "Eleanor, I remember, because she used to sing at the church fete. Lovely voice." Eleanor Redmayne, Agatha breathed. It fits perfectly. She was accused of theft, wasn't she? Yes, though Clarissa always insisted it was a misunderstanding. She seemed terribly distressed when the girl vanished. Agatha's mind raced. So Clarissa had known Eleanor, possibly loved her, and now 20 years later, bones appeared in her garden. Coincidence? She doubted it. Mrs. Blocksby, you're a marvel. Do you realise what this means? I realise you're about to get into trouble, said Mrs. Blocksby gently. Not at all. I'll be discreet. Mrs. Blocksby smiled faintly. Your kind of discretion tends to involve headlines. Nonsense, Agatha said, rising. I'll keep a low profile. By lunchtime, she was at the Red Lion, nursing a gin and tonic and a plan. The usual clientele were out in force. Doris Simpson holding court by the bar, 2 retired colonels arguing about fox hunting, and someone in the corner pretending not to listen. Doris, Agatha began, sliding onto the stool beside her, you know everyone's business. What do you make of the Blaythorns? Doris sniffed. 2 grand by half. He's a bully, she's a bag of nerves. My cousin's plumber once worked up there. Said the place gives you the creeps. Creeps? How? You know, cold spots, whispers, that sort of thing. Old houses remember things, Mrs. Raisin. Yes, like unpaid bills, Agatha muttered. She finished her drink, thanked Doris, and headed home. The drizzle had returned, soft as breath. Hodge greeted her with offended dignity. She fed him, poured a glass of wine, and dialed Charles. Ah, the intrepid detective, he drawled. Solved it yet? Nearly. Tell me, can your posh friends dig up anything on Sir Cedric's first wife? Her name was Miranda. Died abroad, apparently. Typhoid or boredom, depending on who you ask. When? Mid-70s, I think. No children? Lots of gossip. Why? Agatha leaned back, smoke curling from her cigarette. Because Clarissa was working as a governess round about then. I wonder how soon after Miranda's death she married him. You're imagining things again. Of course I am. That's how imagination works. Just don't get arrested. I'll try to restrain myself. She hung up and looked around her cosy sitting room. The fire crackled, the air smelt faintly of gin and ambition. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary, which was exactly why the noise startled her. A faint scrape, then another, at the window. Hodge's head shot up, ears flat. Agatha froze. The curtains shifted slightly with the draught. She rose, heart thudding, and crossed the room. Nothing, only darkness beyond the glass. She told herself it was a branch, perhaps the neighbour's cat. Still, she double-locked the door before going to bed. She dreamed of brooches and bones and a pale hand reaching from the soil. When she woke, it was to the unmistakable crash of something falling. She leapt up, grabbed her dressing gown and charged downstairs. The living room was in disarray, cushions tossed, papers scattered. Hodge crouched on the mantelpiece like a furry gargoyle. The back window was open. Oh, you filthy. She cut herself off, surveying the damage. Nothing missing at first glance, until she looked at the mantel where the brooch had lain. Gone. Her pulse drummed. She searched drawers, shelves, even under the sofa. Nothing. She called Bill, voice taut. Someone's broken in. Stay put. I'm coming over. He arrived 20 minutes later, notebook in hand, eyes narrowing at the scene. Forced entry, he muttered. Anything stolen? Agatha hesitated. Just the brooch. The one from Dembley Gate? Yes. Agatha! He looked ready to throttle her. You realise that makes you the link between a potential murder scene and a burglary. Oh, don't be so melodramatic. Whoever took it wanted to cover their tracks. That proves I'm onto something. It proves you're in danger, he said grimly. She waved a hand. Danger keeps me young. It's not working, he muttered, and she pretended not to hear. After he'd gone, Agatha poured a large gin and sat by the fire. Hodge stretched across her knees. The cottage felt suddenly fragile, as if the walls knew secrets and had grown thin, keeping them. She stroked Hodge absently. Well, someone's scared enough to break in. That's progress, at least. Hodge opened one eye, unimpressed. Agatha smiled faintly. Don't look at me like that. I may have lost the brooch, but I've gained motive, history, and panic. Not bad for a day's work. She reached for her lighter, flame flickering in the dim room. Whoever you are, she murmured to the air, you've just made it personal. Outside, the drizzle returned, tapping lightly on the glass, like polite applause for a woman who had, once again, refused to mind her own business. Carsely's drizzle had matured into a steady, respectable rain by mid-afternoon, the sort that soaked ambition as effectively as it did umbrellas. Agatha Raisin, however, was beyond such deterrence. She marched up the Red Lion steps like a general entering enemy territory, flung open the door and startled the regulars into silence. "Right," she declared, shaking her umbrella. "Who here knows something about the Blaythorns?" A long pause followed, broken only by the squeak of the darts board and the nervous clink of glassware. Doris Simpson, polishing a pint glass with unnecessary vigour, raised an eyebrow. "Good afternoon to you too, Mrs. Raisin." Yes, afternoon. Now, spill." Old Mr. Jessup, the retired postman, perked up from his stool by the fire. "Blaythorns, you say? I used to deliver there regular, back in the day when Sir Cedric was still in London half the week. Always letters for a Miss Redmayne. Cheerful girl, polite as you like. Then one morning, stopped getting them altogether." Agatha's pulse jumped. "Redmayne, you're sure?" "Positive. Pretty handwriting, round loops. I remember because she'd sometimes leave little notes on envelopes. Thank you kindly and that sort. Nice thing, gratitude." "What year was that?" Jessup frowned, the wrinkles on his forehead deepening like ploughed furrows. "Oh, mid-70s maybe. Right before Lady Clarissa came back from wherever she'd been staying." "Abroad," Agatha murmured, remembering Charles's remark. Doris sniffed. "That'd be about the time I saw her burning things in her garden. Middle of the night she was. My Alf came home from the pub and said, 'Doris, there's a proper bonfire going at Dembley Gate.' I told him not to interfere. Gentlefolk have their ways, but I thought it queer. Looked like clothes." The pub hummed with sudden interest. One of the locals coughed dramatically. Another murmured something about witchcraft. Agatha leaned forward, delighted. "Clothes, you say? You're certain?" "Well, it wasn't garden waste unless they've started growing silk blouses," Doris retorted. Before Agatha could press further, the door opened again. Bill Wong entered, still damp from his earlier visit, sighing as if he'd known she'd ignore his warning. "Agatha, what now?" "Gathered intelligence," she said. "You should be thanking me." "Instead, I'll thank you to stop interrogating witnesses in the pub." "They're not witnesses, they're citizens, and we're just chatting." "Half of Evesham will be chatting about this by tea time." "Then you'll have less legwork to do." Bill removed his cap and sat beside her, defeated. Doris set a whisky in front of him, unrequested but necessary. "Listen," he said quietly, "I've looked into it. There was an Eleanor Redmayne employed as governess by the Blaythorns before Clarissa married Sir Cedric. The case was my father's, theft of jewellery, dropped when she disappeared. But there's nothing to connect her to those bones yet." "Except she worked there," Agatha said, "and half the county's domestic staff passed through Dembley Gate at one time or another." "Stop making sense," she muttered. "It's annoying." Bill took a sip, watching her over the rim of his glass. "You realise you've stirred things up. Someone broke into your cottage because you can't leave anything alone." "So you admit it's connected?" "It might be, or it might just be someone tired of your nosiness." Agatha grinned. "Then they'll be exhausted soon, because I'm not stopping." He groaned, but there was fondness in it. "Just don't get yourself killed. I'd hate to have to write that report." They shared a companionable silence, broken by Roy Silver's voice on the phone behind her. She'd dragged him into the scene by proxy, of course. "Darling, the Evening Echo says police found female remains." Marvellous phrase, don't you think? So elegant, so tragic. Are you sure I can't leak a statement? "Roy," she hissed, covering the mouthpiece, "if you so much as whisper this to a journalist, I'll strangle you with your own scarf." "Then I'll wear cashmere," he replied brightly, and hung up. Bill raised an eyebrow. "You really surround yourself with lunatics. They make me look stable." The laughter that followed eased some of the tension, though not much. The pub chatter resumed in lowered tones, but Agatha could feel every eye glancing toward her, the village's own hurricane of scandal. As they left, Bill said, "If you must persist, at least let me get the old files, quietly. We'll review them together." "We?" Agatha echoed, already pleased. "Yes, we. You'll just have to promise not to call the press, the vicar, or Buckingham Palace. I can promise 2 of those." "Good enough," he muttered. They parted outside under the drizzle, each heading home. Agatha lit a cigarette on the walk back, smoke curling in the damp air. She felt exhilarated, the kind of thrill that only danger or gossip could bring. The air smelt of wet grass and adventure. At home the cottage was warm, the fire faintly glowing. She fed Hodge, poured a gin, and tried to read the Times, but her mind kept returning to Doris's image of Clarissa burning clothes. Could it have been Eleanor's uniform, or something worse? When she finally went to bed, her dreams came restless and vivid. Daphne the poodle was digging again, but this time not in Sir Cedric's garden. The dog's paws tore up her own lawn, dirt flying, and when Agatha bent to stop her, a pale hand reached from the soil, clutching her ankle. She woke with a cry and the cold realization that the scratching sound hadn't stopped. It was faint, deliberate. In her garden. She crept to the window, pulse hammering. The moonlight picked out a scatter of paw prints across her flower bed, small, distinct and fresh. She stared, breath clouding the glass. Hodge growled softly, an oddly protective sound. "It's a dog," she whispered. "Just a dog." But there were no dogs loose in Carsely, not at that hour. By morning she'd almost convinced herself it had been a dream. Then she found the envelope. It lay on the doormat, pale grey paper, her name typed neatly across the front. She hesitated, half expecting a bill, but the message inside was short and viciously clear. Some secrets should stay buried. No signature, no mark, only the faintest whiff of damp earth clinging to the paper. Agatha stood very still, cigarette trembling slightly between her fingers. A sensible woman might have gone to the police or even locked the doors. She, instead, felt a thrill of indignation that drowned out fear. "Oh, really?" she muttered. "Threats by post. How quaint." She strode to the window, looked out at the bedraggled hydrangeas, and raised her chin. "Over my dead hydrangea," she said aloud. Hodge leapt onto the windowsill, tail flicking, as if unimpressed by the melodrama. Agatha smiled thinly and lit another cigarette. Smoke curled upward, soft and defiant. Somewhere beyond the drizzle she was certain someone was watching, and she rather hoped they were. After all, there was nothing Agatha Raisin liked better than a mystery that thought it could scare her. By the next morning, a crisp wind followed Agatha up the vicarage path, scattering damp leaves around her heels like gossip eager to be heard. The rain had stopped, but left the air smelling of moss and reprimand. She felt bruised by last night's anonymous note, yet defiant enough to turn fear into drama. If the murderer wanted her frightened, they had chosen the wrong woman. Mrs. Blocksby opened the door before Agatha could knock, her calm expression as comforting as tea on a bad day. "Agatha, dear, I thought I'd see you this morning. You've been agitated, even for you." "I'm not agitated," Agatha said, marching inside, "merely affronted. Someone broke in, scattered Hodge's litter, and stole my clue. Then, for good measure, sent me a death threat." "Oh my," said Mrs. Blocksby mildly, shutting the door. "Do sit down. You look chilled." Agatha allowed herself to be steered toward the sofa and a teapot that already seemed to have anticipated her. The vicar's wife poured with her usual unhurried grace. "Now," said Mrs. Blocksby, "start from the beginning." Agatha did, every detail, embroidered only slightly for effect. The rain, the paw prints, the note. By the time she finished, Mrs. Blocksby was stirring sugar into her own cup, unruffled. "And what do you make of it?" Agatha demanded. "I make of it," said Mrs. Blocksby gently, "that you've upset someone with a secret to lose." "Obviously. But who? Clarissa Blaythorne's fluttering nerves or that pompous husband of hers? He's the sort who'd hide skeletons just to keep his lawn tidy." Mrs. Blocksby smiled faintly. "Clarissa might not be the villain you think. Some women marry tyrants, Agatha, and spend the rest of their lives making excuses for them. You're too charitable. She's hiding something, and I intend to find out what." "Perhaps," said Mrs. Blocksby, "you might try compassion before confrontation. You'd be surprised how often truth responds better to kindness." Agatha snorted. "Kindness gets you a pat on the head. Confrontation gets you an answer." The vicar's wife only sipped her tea. Agatha envied that serenity. It was so aggravatingly effective. Before leaving, she stopped at the churchyard gate, lighting a cigarette against the wind. Mrs. Blocksby's words lingered, irritatingly reasonable. Compassion. It sounded dreadfully slow. By the time Agatha returned home, her answering machine was flashing like an impatient conscience. She pressed play. "Agatha, it's Bill. You'll want to hear this. My father's old notes. The Redmayne case was closed after Sir Cedric intervened. Officially, insufficient evidence, but it stinks. I'll drop copies later. A second message followed, Roy Silver in full performance mode. Darling, brace yourself. I've created a sensation. The Carsely Murder Chronicles. A little website. Nothing dramatic, just tasteful intrigue. We're trending on the Mercester local forum. Agatha's heart sank. Oh, good Lord. She grabbed the phone and dialed him. Roy answered in a rush of triumph. Agatha, you're famous. There's already a comment thread calling you Carsley's Miss Marple with better legs. You idiot, she shouted. Take it down before the police think I'm running a publicity campaign. But it's harmless. Just speculation and a few flattering photos. You used photos? From your parish fete last summer, the one with the jam stall. I said you were Britain's bravest amateur sleuth. Roy, if I'm arrested, I'll name you as my accomplice. Then at least we'll be on the front page together, he chirped. Agatha slammed the receiver down so hard Hodge fled to the top of the dresser. She immediately felt guilty and offered him sardines in apology. The day stretched grey and wet, and Agatha's irritation simmered until early evening when a knock startled her. She opened the door expecting Bill. Instead, Clarissa Blaythorne stood trembling on the step, her raincoat buttoned wrong and her face pale as milk. Mrs. Raisin, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, I shouldn't be here. Nonsense, come in before you dissolve. Agatha ushered her to the sofa, handed her a handkerchief, and switched off the lamp to make the room gentler. Now, what's happened? Clarissa clutched her bag. You've been asking questions about Eleanor Redmayne. I wanted you to hear the truth, at least part of it. Agatha leaned forward, pulse quickening. Eleanor was my cousin, Clarissa said. You must understand. She was young, naive. She came to me in 1977 expecting a child. She'd been dismissed from a household in Mercester. Scandal, whispers, all that nonsense. I took her in at Dembley Gate. She begged me not to tell Cedric. And did you? At first, no. But he found out. He always found out. Clarissa's hands twisted in her lap. He said she had to go. I gave her money for the train. She left that night. I never saw her again. And you didn't report her missing? Clarissa shook her head, tears bright in her eyes. Cedric forbade it. Said she'd chosen her path, that we'd have nothing but disgrace. I believed him. I was a coward. Agatha's anger softened, replaced by reluctant pity. So when the bones turned up, I thought it was punishment for lying all these years. Do you think your husband could have... Please don't ask me that. Clarissa stood abruptly, fumbling for her gloves. I shouldn't have come. Wait. If you want to clear your conscience, you'll have to help me. Tell me who the father was. Clarissa hesitated, gaze darting toward the window. I don't know. She never said, only that he was important. Before Agatha could press further, Clarissa bolted for the door and vanished into the damp twilight. Agatha stood fuming, half from frustration, half from admiration. It was always the apparently fragile ones who managed dramatic exits. She lit a cigarette and stared out into the drizzle. Hodge, curled on the windowsill, suddenly arched his back and hissed. What now? Agatha muttered, moving to the window. A figure was slipping along the hedge at the edge of her garden, tall, wearing a flat cap pulled low. She caught the faint crunch of boots on gravel. Oi! She called, flinging the door open. The cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet soil. But the path was empty. Only the wind moved the hedge. Still, muddy footprints marked the flagstones, fresh, large, leading away toward the lane. Agatha's heart thumped with a mix of fear and excitement. You're getting closer, whoever you are, she muttered. She shut the door, bolted it, and returned to her chair. Outside, the rain began again, a soft, persistent rhythm against the window. Hodge leapt into her lap, fur still bristled, and Agatha stroked him absently. It's always the quiet ones, she told him. Mrs. Bloxby was right. Clarissa's no villain, just another woman married to a bully. Hodge yawned, unimpressed by her insight. Agatha smiled faintly, reaching for her lighter. Still, I'll find the truth. Kindness or no kindness. She lit her cigarette and watched the smoke spiral upward, ghostly and determined. Outside, the vicarage clock chimed the hour, serene and indifferent to human folly. You'd approve, Mrs. Bloxby, she murmured. I'm following your advice, just not the kind way. Hodge stretched, resettled, and began to purr. The rain thickened, the garden darkened, and somewhere beyond the hedge, unseen eyes might still be watching. Agatha exhaled a thin stream of smoke and smiled. "Let them watch," she said softly. "It'll make the victory sweeter." The following morning brought one of those dull, pewter Cotswold skies that promised rain without the courtesy of actually delivering it. Agatha sat at her kitchen table, hair unbrushed, glaring at the phone as if it owed her money. Hodge was asleep on the newspaper, one paw resting possessively on the headline about mystery bones baffle police. When the phone finally rang, she snatched it up. "Agatha Raisin." "Bill," came the reply. "You'll want to hear this. Colin Trask, the gardener at Dembley Gate, has a record. Assault charge, 1983. Used to work for Sir Cedric's old law chambers in London." "So our humble man of the soil has thorns," said Agatha, lighting a cigarette. "And connections." "It doesn't prove anything," Bill warned. "But keep your distance. The man's temper isn't folklore." Agatha hung up, ignoring his advice with the ease of long practice. She turned to Hodge. "A violent gardener in a house of secrets. Honestly, if this were fiction, I'd say it was overplotted." By afternoon, she had drafted a plan. Charles Fraith, as ever, was the necessary accomplice. "You're up to something again?" he said when she called. His tone was amused rather than disapproving. "We're attending a lecture," Agatha said. "Sir Cedric's speaking at the Mercester Historical Society, on justice and morality of all things. We'll observe, casually." "You mean heckle?" "I mean question, firmly." "Ah, intellectual hooliganism. I'll fetch the car." That evening, Mercester's town hall gleamed with polished brass and bad coffee. The audience was a blend of tweed, self-importance, and mild dozing. Agatha, fortified by 2 glasses of indifferent wine, sat beside Charles near the back. Sir Cedric took the podium, every inch the pompous relic. His voice carried with the ponderous gravity of a judge pronouncing sentence on morality itself. "In rural England," he droned, "justice is not merely a matter of law, but of legacy." Agatha whispered, "Legacy of deceit, perhaps." Charles nudged her. "Behave." But, as the speech lumbered on, Agatha's patience wilted. When Sir Cedric began waxing lyrical about the moral superiority of discretion, she could stand it no longer. She rose to her feet. "Excuse me." Dozens of heads swivelled. Charles sank lower in his seat. "Mrs. Raisin," said Sir Cedric, voice tight. "Do you have a question?" "Yes," she said sweetly. "How do you reconcile your enthusiasm for truth with your habit of burying it, sometimes literally?" A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Charles muttered, "Oh, marvellous. Now we'll be escorted out." Sir Cedric's composure wavered. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do," Agatha said, emboldened. "I was referring to certain developments at Dembley Gate." A murmur ran through the crowd. Sir Cedric's face reddened. "You're out of order, madam." "And you," Agatha shot back, "are out of excuses." The tension broke when a nervous organiser hustled forward, murmuring about civility. Sir Cedric adjusted his tie, his fury simmering. "The dead," he said, voice sharp as glass, "should not trouble the living." The audience fell silent. It was such a peculiar phrase, too raw, too revealing. Agatha sat down slowly, a small, victorious thrill stirring in her chest. After the lecture ended, she waited outside under the dim glow of the car park lamps. The drizzle had begun, fine as dust. Sir Cedric emerged, his wife trailing behind like a pale shadow. Then came Colin Trask, cap low, gait quick. Agatha ducked behind a pillar, heart hammering. "You promised it was over," Colin hissed, voice barely audible. "Keep your mouth shut," Sir Cedric snapped. "I won't be blackmailed by my own gardener." Clarissa gasped softly, glancing around, but neither man noticed. "You owe me," Colin said. "If it comes out, it's your neck." Sir Cedric leaned close, his words low and venomous. "Be careful, Trask. I've buried worse than you." Then he strode away, leaving the gardener trembling beside the cars. Agatha's mind raced. Blackmail, threats, and now this buried worse remark. It was practically a signed confession. She would have followed them both if Charles hadn't caught her arm. "You've got the look of a bloodhound," he murmured. "Come along before you get bitten." The next morning, Bill Wong's knock came too early and too grim. Agatha, bleary-eyed and uncombed, opened the door. "You'd better sit down," he said. "Oh no, who's dead now?" "Colin Trask, found near the greenhouse at Dembley Gate. Fall from a ladder, apparently. Broke his neck. Agatha stared. Fall, my foot. Someone helped him down. Maybe. Or maybe he slipped. There's no proof yet. Bill, I heard him threaten Sir Cedric last night. And I heard you antagonized him in public, Bill replied wearily. Don't make it harder for yourself. You think I? No, he interrupted gently, but others might. The villagers love a scandal, and you've painted a target on your back. She slumped into her chair. He's dead because I stirred it up. If you'd kept quiet, Bill said softly, someone else might have died instead. Don't take all the blame. He stayed long enough to leave her with a police statement to sign and a warning not to interfere. She ignored the second part naturally. When he'd gone, Agatha wandered to the window. Outside, the day hung grey and heavy. She imagined the greenhouse at Dembley Gate, the broken ladder, the body sprawled among the potted roses. The very air seemed thick with consequence. Charles rang that afternoon. You've made the Gazette, darling. Local sleuth's lecture outburst precedes death of gardener. You're infamous again. Wonderful, she muttered. At this rate, I'll have to emigrate to escape my own reputation. Come stay at my place instead, he suggested lightly. Fewer reporters, better wine. Tempting, but I've still got a murderer to expose, and possibly a lawsuit. Small price for progress, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. After she hung up, the house felt too quiet. Even Hodge seemed subdued, curled into a perfect circle on the armchair. Agatha poured herself a gin and sat opposite him. I know, she said. I should have left it alone, but can you imagine him getting away with it? That smug face, that pompous voice. Hodge blinked, unimpressed. She sighed. Fine. I'll stop when it's done, not before. Outside, the drizzle thickened, softening the world into shades of regret. Agatha stared into her glass, seeing only the reflection of her own stubbornness. Justice and morality, she muttered. He preached about both, and now his gardener's dead. Hypocrite. A flash of lightning flickered across the window pane, illuminating the cottage for a heartbeat. It looked almost theatrical, as if fate itself enjoyed a bit of staging. She rose, pulled the curtains shut, and lit a cigarette. The smoke curled upward like a thought too heavy to voice. You've rattled someone's cage, Bill had said. He was right, and the bars were starting to shake. Hodge stirred, stretching luxuriously before settling back to sleep. Agatha gave him a faint smile. At least you don't judge me. He yawned, showing perfect indifference, and the cottage fell quiet again, only the rain whispering against the glass like a secret she wasn't yet ready to hear. The rain had turned sly. Not the honest downpour of spring, but the soft, persistent mist that seeps into collars and tempers alike. Agatha stood by her cottage window, smoking with a determination that suggested she was single-handedly keeping the tobacco industry afloat. Hodge twitched an ear from the armchair, but wisely stayed silent. The news of Colin Trask's accident still itched at her mind. Too neat, too convenient. Bill's cautionary tone, "Stay out of it, Agatha," had the same effect as a red rag to a bull. She crushed her cigarette, grabbed the phone, and dialed Charles Fraith. "What now?" came his languid drawl. "We're going back to Dembley Gate," said Agatha. "Oh, splendid. I was wondering how to make my evening more criminal." "You owe me," she said. "I owe you dinner, not prison." "You owe me interest, after that fiasco with your cousin's hunt ball." There was a sigh. "Fine, but if I end up arrested again, I'm telling the constable you seduced me into it." "You couldn't prove it," she snapped, already pleased. That night, restless and unresolved, but with Charles already recruited, Agatha hunched under her trench coat in Charles's vintage convertible as they slipped through the deserted, fog-wrapped Cotswold lanes toward Dembley Gate. Charles, elegant even in exasperation, parked behind the estate wall. "Trespassing for love," he murmured, pocketing the keys. "You'll make a romantic of me yet." "Don't flatter yourself," said Agatha. "We're trespassing for truth." "Truth rarely wears high heels." She glared and stepped out, the wet grass squelching beneath her sensible shoes. The great house loomed beyond the hedgerow, Dembley Gate, proud and decayed, its windows black as judgment. Somewhere inside, the ghost of Eleanor Redmayne waited for justice, or possibly for company. They slipped along the gravel path, keeping low until they reached the greenhouse. The glass panes reflected the moonlight in streaks, like the ribs of some giant sleeping beast. Agatha pressed her hand to the door. It creaked open easily, too easily. Unlocked, she whispered. How careless. Or how ominous, said Charles. Inside, the air was rich with soil and the damp sweetness of tomato plants. A faint lamp glowed at the far end, left burning by habit or design. Agatha's eyes adjusted. Near the rose cuttings lay a patch of earth too fresh, too smooth. There, she said. Someone's been digging again. Possibly gardening, Charles suggested. Don't be obtuse. Even gardeners have taste. Look at the symmetry. That's concealment. Agatha crouched, brushing at the soil. Her fingers hit something soft and yielding, leather. She pulled gently until a woman's handbag emerged, mud-caked but intact. Charles whistled softly. A handbag? You're turning into Mary Bloody Poppins of crime. Agatha ignored him, unclasping it with shaking fingers. Inside lay a bundle of faded letters, bound by a ribbon gone brittle with age. The top one was signed in looping script, Eleanor Redmayne. She read aloud, "Dearest Clarissa, I fear he means to send me away." Her voice faltered. Charles's tone sobered. This could be it, Agatha. Proof. Proof that Clarissa knew and that Cedric covered it up. She was trying to protect her cousin. Oh, that poor woman. Before Charles could reply, a voice snapped through the greenhouse like thunder. "What the devil are you doing here?" The overhead lights blazed on. Sir Cedric stood in the doorway, dressing gown belted tight, shotgun levelled. His face was florid with rage. "Put that down," Agatha began. "You filthy prying creature," he barked, "breaking into my home, snooping through private things." "Murder tends to be rather public," she shot back, though her knees had gone watery. "Don't," Charles hissed. Cedric advanced, the gun trembling slightly in his hands. "You think you're clever, gossiping, meddling. Well, let me tell you, Mrs. Raisin, the dead are better company than women who can't leave the past alone." "Perhaps that's why you buried them," she said, more bravely than she felt. He gestured with the barrel. "Move. Inside. Now." They obeyed, walking ahead as the rain thickened outside. Agatha's mind darted frantically. Charles, she noticed, was studying the man's grip, calm, calculating, as if planning the odds. In the drawing-room, Cedric ordered them to sit. He paced like a barrister addressing a guilty jury. "You people never understand," he said. "You judge without knowing. Eleanor was hysterical, dangerous. She tried to ruin us." "By existing?" Agatha asked sharply. "By scheming. She trapped Clarissa with that pregnancy, threatened to expose the family. I only did what was necessary to preserve decency." "Decency?" Agatha said. "You buried her in the garden like a tulip bulb," he roared, raising the shotgun. Charles moved subtly closer to the table. Agatha knew she needed to stall. She widened her eyes in mock panic. "Oh, my heart! It's fluttering. Charles, catch me." "Catch you?" "Now." She stumbled dramatically. Cedric turned instinctively. Charles seized the moment, grabbing the barrel and twisting hard. The gun clattered to the carpet. Agatha kicked it under the sofa. "Run!" she shouted. They bolted through the conservatory doors, Cedric's curses echoing after them. The garden blurred. Rain, mud, adrenaline. Headlights flashed at the gate. The distant wail of sirens grew louder. "You called the police?" gasped Agatha. "No," said Charles, "but apparently someone else did." They reached the car, breathless and soaked. Behind them the house glowed with confusion. Blue lights, shouting officers, the wretched grandeur of a scandal unburied. At dawn the next morning, Bill arrived at Agatha's cottage. She met him in her dressing gown, cigarette already alight. "You look like you've been through a hedge backwards," he said. "I was through a hedge. Twice." He handed her a folder. "You were right. Fingerprints from Sir Cedric on the handbag, on the ribbon, on everything. He's confessed to losing his temper. Says Eleanor was blackmailing him about the child. Claims it was an accident." Agatha snorted. "And the garden buried her accidentally, I suppose." Bill gave her a look both fond and tired. "You got him, Agatha. Try not to gloat." "Who's gloating? I'm furious it took this long." "You also nearly got shot." "Occupational hazard," she said airily. He sighed. "Sometimes I think you'd walk into a lion's den for gossip." "Only if the lion were titled," she said, and he laughed despite himself. When he left, the silence returned, but a gentler one. Agatha poured herself a small gin and stood by the window, watching the mist lift from the village. The newspaper van rattled past, the postman waved, and Life in Carsely began to resume its ordinary rhythm, the remarkable always giving way to the mundane. Charles rang an hour later. "We're heroes, my dear," he said. "Front page. Local sleuth foils Cotswold killer. Rather makes us sound romantic." "Speak for yourself," she said. "I look like a drowned ferret." "A heroic ferret," he amended. She smiled despite herself. "Clarissa?" In shock, apparently, but relieved. "She's going to her sister's in Devon." "Good. She deserves peace. She's suffered enough for other people's sins." Charles's voice softened. "You sound almost philosophical, Aggie." "I'm tired, that's all." "Then rest. You've earned it." When she hung up, Hodge padded over, tail aloft, demanding breakfast as if nothing in the world had changed. She fed him absently, mind replaying Cedric's words. The dead should not trouble the living, but they always did. That was the trouble with conscience. It never stayed buried. Agatha lit a cigarette, the first draw sharp and satisfying. The smoke curled lazily upward, meeting the faint sunlight breaking through the fog. "Another man ruined by his own ego," she murmured. "You'd think they'd learn." Hodge blinked up at her, unimpressed. She smiled faintly. "Don't look at me like that. I meddle, yes, but at least I don't kill anyone. Not yet." He yawned elaborately and went back to sleep, a perfect portrait of feline indifference. Agatha envied him, his serenity, his certainty that life would continue precisely as it pleased him. She opened the window. The air smelled of rain and freshly turned soil, the scent of endings and beginnings. Somewhere down the lane a church bell tolled the hour. Agatha stubbed out her cigarette, poured another gin, and let herself grin. "Justice and morality in rural England," she said aloud. "Not bad for a night's work." And with that she sat down beside Hodge, listening to the rain return, soft, steady, and oddly comforting. Morning came to Carsely draped in a fine mist, the sort that blurred edges and softened even scandal. The headlines had already made their quiet rounds. Prominent barrister arrested after nighttime drama. In smaller print, local woman's curiosity aids police inquiry. Agatha, who had expected no better, scowled into her toast. "AIDS police inquiry," she muttered, as if I'd handed them an umbrella. Hodge yawned from the windowsill, unimpressed by human vanity. The phone rang. It was Bill Wong, sounding uncharacteristically subdued. "Clarissa Blaythorne's asked to see you," he said. "She's ready to talk. Talk or confess. A bit of both. Come quietly, Agatha. No interviews, no Roy, no drama." "That's like asking the weather not to rain," she said, grabbing her coat. Dembley Gate looked different in daylight, less sinister, more sad. Police tape fluttered across the drive like tired bunting. The house itself seemed diminished, stripped of its pomposity now that its master sat in custody. Bill met her at the door. His expression softened when he saw her. "You've done it again," he said. "Oh, don't start with that tone. It wasn't luck." "No," he said quietly. "It was nerve." They entered the morning room where Clarissa sat near the fire in a neat grey suit, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The sharp lines of grief had already carved themselves into her face. "Mrs. Raisin," she said, rising, "thank you for coming." "You needn't thank me," said Agatha briskly. "I only poked my nose where it didn't belong." "Sometimes," Clarissa said softly, "that's the only way truth survives." Bill gave her an encouraging nod, and Clarissa began. Her voice trembled but never broke. "Eleanor came to me one winter evening years ago. She was pregnant, frightened, desperate. She begged me not to tell Cedric. She said the father was someone respectable, a client of his chambers. She only wanted to have the baby in safety and then leave." Agatha leaned forward. "But he found out?" "Of course. He found out everything." Clarissa's eyes glistened. He was livid, called her vile names, accused her of blackmail. I tried to reason with him, but he said she'd ruin us all. That night there was shouting, and then silence. She drew a shuddering breath. When I went to the greenhouse, Eleanor was lying there. I thought she'd fainted, but there was blood on her head. Cedric said she'd attacked him, that it was self-defense. He told me to fetch the gardener to help bury her. I was too frightened to think. I obeyed. Agatha's cigarette trembled slightly between her fingers. "You helped him?" "He told me she'd already given birth, that he'd arranged for the child's adoption. I wanted to believe him. I told myself it was mercy. And the gardener? Colin Trask. He was loyal, but he wasn't a fool. Years later he came back, drunk and bitter, said he'd earned his silence. Cedric paid him off for years. When the money stopped, he threatened to tell. Until he ended up dead, Agatha said grimly. Clarissa nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. He fell, they say. But I know my husband. He never left things to chance. Silence settled between them, heavy and human. The fire popped, sending a small ember spinning onto the rug. Bill quietly stamped it out. "Thank you, Lady Blaythorne," he said. "You've done the right thing at last." "It's rather late for right things," she whispered. Agatha felt a sudden pang of pity. Clarissa looked smaller now, like a woman hollowed out by someone else's life. "You could still start again," she said awkwardly. "You're free of him now." Clarissa gave a wan smile. "Free? I'll never be free of what I did. I helped bury a woman and lied for 20 years. That's not freedom, Mrs. Raisin. That's survival." Later that day, Bill brought news from headquarters. They stood outside the Mercester station, the rain beginning again in soft, dutiful drops. "He's confessed," said Bill. "So he finally grew a conscience?" "Hardly. He ranted about reputation and betrayal. Said you'd destroyed a man of standing." Agatha let out a short laugh. "Oh, poor dear. Outwitted by a middle-aged woman in kitten heels." "He collapsed during questioning," Bill went on. "Heart attack, they think. He's in hospital, not talking." Agatha tilted her chin, exhaling smoke. "Typical. Dies of indignation before remorse." "He's not dead," Bill corrected. "Not yet." "Then perhaps he can spend his recovery contemplating morality, though I doubt it." Bill hesitated, then smiled faintly. "You won't get official credit, you know." "I never do. But I'll say this, Agatha. Without you it might have stayed buried." "Everything worth knowing usually is," she said. That evening the Red Lion was alive with speculation. Doris Simpson held court near the fire, recounting for the 5th time how she'd always said there was something odd about those Blaythorns. Roy Silver had arrived from London, declaring the whole affair prime television material. "Agatha Raisin, the Carsely Chronicles," he said, waving his sherry. "We'll sell it to the BBC. You'll play yourself, or perhaps Joanna Lumley if she's free." "Roy, if you breathe one word to the press, I'll bury you under the same roses," Agatha warned. "Don't tempt me," he said cheerfully. Charles joined them, elegant and smug. "I've ordered a bottle of brandy. Seemed appropriate for our triumph." "It wasn't exactly a triumph," she said, "more of a slow unravelling of male arrogance." "Which you handled beautifully," he said, raising his glass. "To Agatha Raisin, scourge of hypocrisy and champion of chaos." She smiled despite herself. "And to Charles Fraith, supplier of cars, charm, and unnecessary commentary." "A pleasure," he said. The toast was warm, the brandy warmer. For once, Agatha felt the rare satisfaction of justice that hadn't soured yet. But as she looked around at the cosy crowd, Bill chatting quietly with the landlord, Mrs. Bloxby smiling over her tea, Roy preening, she felt a faint ache behind the contentment. "You know," she said, swirling her drink, "people always think solving murders makes you feel heroic. It doesn't. It just reminds you how foolish people can be." Charles looked at her with that half-smile that never reached his eyes. "Including yourself?" "Especially myself," she said. The next morning, Carsely returned to normal, or its version of it. The scandal had faded into gossip, then into legend. The Garden Society was already planning next year's fate, perhaps hoping to rebrand itself as less murderous. Agatha sat at home, nursing a pot of tea and an article draft Roy had insisted she read. "Village Sleuth uncovers high society horror." "He's incorrigible," she muttered, tearing it neatly in half. Hodge leapt onto the table, scattering the remains like confetti. "Exactly," she told him. "Some things are better left unpublished." The doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Bloxby, wrapped in her usual calm. She carried a basket of scones and a gentle smile. "I thought you might need company," she said. Agatha poured tea. "If this is another lecture on humility, you're too late. I'm already humble. Temporarily." Mrs. Bloxby chuckled. "No lecture, dear. Only admiration, though you do look exhausted." "I am. It's draining, saving the world from its own stupidity." "You didn't save the world," Mrs. Bloxby said kindly. "You helped one woman find peace and stopped another from lying to herself any longer. That's enough." Agatha gave her a look of mock irritation. Why must you always sound like the closing scene of a Sunday drama? Because it's true, Mrs. Blocksby said simply. They sat in comfortable silence, the kettle humming faintly on the stove. Outside, the drizzle returned, silvering the garden. You know, Agatha said after a moment, I think I liked her, Clarissa. Underneath the fear, she had some spine. We all do, said Mrs. Blocksby. It just takes the right person to make us use it. Agatha smiled wryly. And sometimes that person's a pushy ex-public relations woman with too much eyeliner. Precisely. That evening, as dusk softened the Cotswold hills, Agatha stood by her window with a gin in hand. The garden, once trampled by footprints and police torches, looked serene again. Hodge prowled at her ankles, occasionally mewing for attention. She thought of Clarissa, alone in some Devon cottage, haunted but alive. Of Bill, back to his reports. Of Charles, probably charming a barmaid somewhere. Of herself, restless, proud, and, she admitted, lonely. Still, the village looked lovely in twilight. Ordinary life resumed its steady rhythm. Doris's gossip, Mrs. Blocksby's kindness, the eternal rattle of Roy's fax machine. Agatha took one last drag of her cigarette and exhaled slowly. The smoke drifted toward the ceiling, pale as memory. Another man ruined by his own ego, she murmured, and another woman blamed for tidying up after him. Hodge leapt into her lap, purring with imperious satisfaction. Agatha stroked his fur absently. Don't worry, darling, she said. The world's safe again, until next week. The cat blinked, unconvinced. Outside, the rain began once more, soft, inevitable, and oddly soothing. Agatha smiled faintly, watching it trace the window pane. There was peace in that sound, and for once she allowed herself to feel it. Maybe Mrs. Blocksby's right, she said aloud. Maybe meddling is just my way of caring. Hodge stretched luxuriously, tail flicking in gentle dismissal. Fine, she said. You're right too. Caring's overrated. She refilled her glass, leaned back, and watched the drizzle blur the garden lights into silver smudges. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour, serene and forgiving. Agatha raised her glass in a small, private toast. To Eleanor Redmayne, she murmured, and to inconvenient women everywhere. Then, with a satisfied sigh, she switched off the lamp. The room glowed softly in the twilight, and Hodge purred, the only applause she ever really wanted. A week later, Carsely had returned to its usual serenity, or its approximation of it. The drizzle was back in residence, soft as gossip, and the village green looked freshly washed, as if the scandal of Dembley Gate had been scrubbed from memory along with the mud. At the Red Lion, the regulars had settled on their favourite version of events. According to Doris Simpson, Agatha Raisin had single-handedly disarmed Sir Cedric, unearthed the bones and comforted the widow, all before breakfast. Old Mr. Jessup insisted that Bill Wong had done the lot, and that Agatha had merely provided moral support and shouting. The truth, as usual, lay somewhere untidy in between. Agatha herself listened to it all with grim amusement over a half-pint of cider. Roy Silver had returned to London in a cloud of perfume and unfinished headlines. Charles had decamped to his estate, and Bill had retreated into paperwork. That left her alone with Carsley's collective memory, a dangerous thing to tangle with. "Well," said Doris, polishing a glass, "you've certainly put us on the map, Mrs. Raisin." "Just what every village needs," said Agatha dryly. "A murder for the tourist brochure." "Oh, don't say that. We're all grateful you solved it." "Grateful? Half the parish thinks I buried the poor woman myself." Doris laughed. "They'll find someone else to whisper about next week. The WI's baking competition's coming up." "Yes," said Agatha. "Bloodshed's easier to forgive than bad pastry." That afternoon brought one of those uncertain bursts of sunshine the Cotswolds specialise in, optimistic but brief. Agatha was half-heartedly deadheading tulips when Mrs. Blocksby appeared at the gate, carrying a basket covered with a tea towel. "If that's virtue under there," said Agatha, "I'd rather not." "Scones," said Mrs. Blocksby, unperturbed, "and a little clotted cream. You've looked pale lately." "It's my natural complexion," said Agatha, pale with irritation. Mrs. Blocksby smiled and followed her inside. The cottage smelled faintly of tobacco and lilies. On the mantelpiece stood an absurd little silver cup from some long-forgotten village raffle, now repurposed as a vase for wildflowers. "You've redecorated," Mrs. Bloxby said mildly. "Improvised. One can't waste silverware, even tacky silverware." They sat at the kitchen table while the kettle boiled. Through the open window came the sound of a lawnmower, the distant bark of a dog, and the calm, unrepentant peace of rural life carrying on as if murder had never visited. Mrs. Bloxby spread cream on her scone with the patience of a saint. "You've helped set something right, you know." Agatha shrugged. "I only wanted to win a pet show." Mrs. Bloxby laughed softly. "And instead you saved a woman's name." "Yes, well," Agatha said, lighting a cigarette, "it's not the first time I've made a fool of myself and ended up useful." "Perhaps that's your gift," Agatha snorted. "Hardly. My gift's getting into trouble before breakfast." They ate in companionable silence for a moment. The rain returned, tapping at the window like a neighbour who'd forgotten her umbrella. Agatha felt a flicker of melancholy and that odd, familiar letdown after adventure. "You'll miss it," Mrs. Bloxby said quietly. "What? Murder?" "Purpose," Agatha frowned. "You make me sound tragic. I'm perfectly content." "Of course you are," Mrs. Bloxby said, smiling with the kind of kindness that saw straight through denial. By early evening, the light turned pewter again, soft and forgiving. Carsely's lanes glistened with puddles, the hedgerows heavy with new green. Agatha stood at her window, cigarette in hand, watching smoke mingle with the mist. Hodge lay curled at her feet, purring in the lazy rhythm of creatures untouched by human drama. On the sill, the ridiculous trophy glimmered dully, its cup brimming with wildflowers picked from the verge, daisies, buttercups, and one defiant rose. She thought of Clarissa Blaythorne, quietly vanishing from the headlines, and of Sir Cedric's furious collapse in the face of disgrace. Justice, she'd learned, was rarely elegant. It tended to arrive muddy, inconvenient, and late, rather like herself. She smiled faintly, exhaling a ribbon of smoke. "All that fuss," she murmured, "and it started with a dog and a bone." The memory of that chaotic pet show seemed almost comical now. Hodge yowling in protest, Sir Cedric sneering, the perfect Cotswold afternoon shattered by discovery. A village tragedy wrapped, as ever, in absurdity. Agatha picked up her glass of gin and turned toward the fire, which flickered weakly against the damp. "Do you suppose," she asked Hodge, "I'm cursed to spend my middle age solving other people's messes?" Hodge stretched, blinked once, and went back to sleep, the feline verdict on human ambition. Agatha laughed softly. "Useless. The only male in my life who doesn't argue." She sat down, resting the gin on her knee, watching the rain silver the garden. Somewhere beyond the drizzle, Doris was probably recounting the story again, how Agatha Raisin had saved the day through fearless wit and sheer female intuition. Roy would be turning it into copy, Charles into anecdote, Bill into paperwork, and Mrs. Bloxby, bless her, into forgiveness. As for Agatha, she only felt the curious mixture of pride and boredom that always followed her victories. Life would go on, gossip, gin, gardening, until the next foolish person decided to make mischief in Carsely. She stubbed out her cigarette, poured another gin, and leaned back in her chair. "You'd think I'd be satisfied," she muttered, "but satisfaction's overrated." Hodge twitched an ear in gentle disagreement. "Fine," she said. "You win. I'll take satisfaction for tonight." The rain softened into a steady patter, rhythmic and forgiving. Somewhere down the lane a church bell tolled 7, the same unhurried note it had sounded through every scandal and salvation Carsely ever produced. Agatha smiled, lifted her glass and murmured, "To boredom, the safest state of all." She drank, set the glass aside, and watched the last curl of smoke drift upward, delicate and vanishing, like truth once it's been told too often. Outside, spring went on blooming, indifferent to fame or folly. Inside, Agatha Raisin, Carsely's most meddlesome heroine, sat content for now, cat at her feet, cigarette glowing softly in the dusk, already wondering what scandal the village would serve up next.